must have really liked my remarks.
Yeah, look at that. I did.
They're fantastic.
So, Senator Scott from South Carolina, you've been here before. But remind the folks, how you grew up, what you did before you became this U.S. Senator that we watch on Fox News.
Well, I grew up in South Carolina in a single-parent household, mired in poverty. My parents got divorced when I was about 7 years old. So for my younger years, I was really disillusioned about life and about America and about what was possible. So delusioned that I tell my joke that I flunked out of high school as a freshman. How many of you flunked out of high school? Oh, just me. I'm sorry. Never mind. Yes. This is not an audience participation part.
Yeah.
I failed world geography and civics. Civics is the study of politics, which tells me God has a sense of humor, because I'm a United States Senator. I also failed Spanish and English. And if you fail Spanish and English, no one calls you bilingual. They all call you biignorant, because you can't speak any language. That's where I came from. I had the good privilege of meeting a mentor, a Chick-fil-A operator, who was a Christian, who taught me about conservative principles, not as Republicans, but as Christians. And I had a praying mother who believed that.
That's principles over politics, right?
Yes. And
you were getting applause there, so I'm helping you out. So you get the applause.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And a mother who believed that prayer was the key, very much in the same fashion as 2 Timothy 1 starts off with Eunice and Lois, the grandmother and mother of Timothy, that her son, with faith in Christ Jesus, could be somebody. That there's no other way to define significance in this world except through faith in Jesus. So as a freshman in college, I accepted Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior, September 22nd, 1983. And as an elected official, I've tried to model my policy positions after the gospel, not after conservatism or republicanism or Americanism, but after Jesusism. So,
amen.
That's simple.
Amen. So after flunking out of high school, and I don't even want to ask you what college accepted you,
Yes,
but
yes. Thank God for football. Anyway, go ahead.
yeah, get an amen. What inspired you to be a U.S. Senator?
I can't say that I ever was inspired to be a U.S. Senator. One of the things that my mentor, John Moniz, taught me was that if you want to get something out of life, focus on giving. He taught me really the core principles of Galatians 6:7, whatsoever you sow, you will reap. Verse 9 talks about if you wait long enough, you'll get the response. And Luke 6:38, give it, it shall be given unto you in good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over. He taught me that it was in my enlightened self-interest not to worry about receiving, but worry about giving. And frankly, he said the best way for a poor kid to make a difference is through public service, investing yourself in something that cannot give you a return. And that over time led me into local politics, and then through the grace of God, an opportunity manifested where I could run for Congress. And when that happened, I jumped into a fairly competitive race and was blessed beyond recognition.
Well, what I want you to pick up on what he just said, because too often we see public service today as one of the lowest things you could do, because it's just filled with, whatever we watch about it. It is one of the highest callings. Right. And why it's called being a minister of God to that institution. So thank you with that perspective. Thank Senator Tim Scott for that perspective.
I can bless that.
Senator Lankford, same thing. I know you're from Oklahoma, kind of give the background, and then what kind of got you, because you're a Baptist, right?
That's correct. Yeah. And admit it publicly.
And in 2007 and 8, I chaired Governor Mike Huckabee's presidential run. And I loved it when this lady went up to him and said, "Are you one of those narrow-minded Baptists?" And he asked, "What do you mean by narrow-minded? That you believe only the Baptists are going to go to heaven?" And he said, "Oh, ma'am, I'm way more narrow than that." I don't think all the Baptists are going to make it. So yeah, welcome
But we're
to the
not
family
naming
leadership.
names, yeah.
But give us your story, your background, what led you to be a United States Senator.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of an odd duck as well in this, that I had no political background at all. No one in my family was involved in politics, nothing like that. My parents divorced. So Jim and I joke about this. We were in a race there. My parents divorced when I was 4, and so he made it all the way to 7. So he got a lot more time. But for me and my family, just growing up, my mom was a librarian. Engaged. We were at a very large church. I was living in Dallas at that point, where I grew up with my grandparents, living with them, and my mom and my older brother. We went to First Baptist Church, Dallas. And at that time period, when I was 8 years old, Mom was literally dragging me to church every time the doors were open. And she was looking for men to be able to invest in my life, in ways to be able to get engaged. And I can still remember at 8 years old, sitting in the balcony, paying attention for the first time, probably, and listening. My pastor was Dr. W.A. Criswell, and listening to Dr. Criswell preach, and it starting to sink in and understanding this one simple thing: there is a God, and I don't know him. And that one simple truth just echoed in my mind. I couldn't let go of. And I was still thinking about it when I got home that night, and was laying in my bed just thinking about this one simple truth: there is a God, I don't know him. And as complicated as we make the gospel at times, I think we overcomplicate the simple truth that there is a God who loves us and who pursues us, and who reveals to us the truth that we need to understand at that moment and gives us the opportunity to be able to respond to it. And at 8 years old, I prayed and accepted Christ. I was baptized Easter Sunday, 1976. That began a journey for me. That wasn't a close journey with God. It just, growing up, wasn't around a lot. Mom remarried, moved, went to college, actually did graduate high school.
There
Went to
are
college.
small miracles everywhere. So it's a good thing. Yeah, it's good.
I was in many ways the opposite. I was the nerdy band kid in Latin club and in the debate club, and I was that kid.
So
okay?
just how nerdy were you? What instrument did you play?
Yeah, okay. I was the drummer. At least I was the cool kid, that was drummer. I joked around with folks all the time that I was the rare drummer that actually made it through drum corps without smoking marijuana. So that was pretty remarkable.
So
to be able to
420
make through-
means
yeah.
nothing to you.
For me, I was that kid growing up, just around all the nerdy books, and I read the newspaper even as a little kid, and my mom and my grandmother was just addicted to talk news radio at that time. There wasn't talk radio at that time, just news, so the news was always on. I was involved in policy and ideas, just being in speech and debate, but never anything in politics. As a senior in high school, I was called to ministry. It was very clear, it was very distinct. Started getting mentored in college and started getting involved in youth ministry and loved it. Served in youth ministry for 22 years. Went to Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, graduated Master of Divinity in Biblical Languages.
I want to stop you for a second.
Yeah.
He served in youth ministry for 22 years. That deserves an applause.
So here's the problem with that, Bob.
Bless you.
No, here's the problem with that. When I tell people that I was a youth pastor for 22 years and now I'm a United States Senator, that either terrifies them or excites them, one or the other. So I never know just their relationship with their youth pastor. But for me, serving in youth ministry, serving with families, was just the joy of my life. The last 15 years of ministry, I directed a camp called Falls Creek. Falls Creek's the largest camp in America. We have 51,000 students that come a summer. And it's a very unique place. It was not uncommon for us to have a summer with more than 2,000 students coming to Christ in a summer. It is the greatest place to be able to serve in ministry because you get the opportunity to be able to be around people at moments of high impact. Can't imagine anything I would rather do more. And then in 2008, God completely interrupted our life. In 2008 and 9, in that time period, God spoke to my wife and I separately that we were supposed to run for Congress. And it's a long story, but it was clear and it was distinct. And both of us, when we both heard it, we talked about it, had a long conversation, and decided, okay, we'll pray about this for a month, but honestly thought this is going to be like Abraham, Isaac going up to Mount Moriah, and we're going to get to the top, and God's going to say, thanks for being faithful, but there's the ram, okay? You don't actually have to do this. You can keep doing what you love, working with students. But we got to the top of Mount Moriah, and he was like, no, kill it. We're going to kill your old career, and we're going to do something different. And in March of 2009, I had to come to the point of, okay, we're supposed to do this. And I don't know what he's calling us to do or why, but we're supposed to do this. So we finished up the summer at camp. I resigned September the 1st of 2009 and started a run for Congress in 2010. 7-way primary, 2-way runoff, 3-way general election, won, and then stepped through into this journey. But all along through the path for me was this is what God has called us to do, to be able to step into the middle of this, because there is a task. I'm a firm believer that God doesn't call people to occupations. I know not everybody believes that. Some people think that God calls you to an occupation. I think God calls us to himself, and then he assigns a task. But our first calling is not to what we do, it's to who we follow. So.
Well said. Very, very well said. Before I get in the heart of the story, just want to follow up on what you just said, because when I first called up my wife and said, Darla, I think I'm going to run for governor, she had 3 words for me, and they were not, I love you. They were, are you nuts?
Yeah.
Okay? And so obviously I lost, that's why I'm here. But
But we wouldn't be here if you hadn't gone through that first.
right.
Yeah.
So you two don't look like each other.
All that hair he has.
That's I was going to point
The
that.
red hair.
I have hair jealousy.
It's the red hair.
Yeah. Yes.
So
Maybe the greatest minority in the Senate.
It is the greatest minority in the Senate are redheads.
You did
Fewer
point that out.
redheads than any other group in the Senate.
Yeah. There you have it. There you go.
well, we used to. I was a redhead growing up as well,
Okay.
and I believe stress took the red out.
Yeah.
So
My daughter calls this salt and paprika now.
that's why God didn't give me girls. So, what was the inspiration to say, listen, guys, something's going on here that's not right. We need to do something different. We're seeing a divided America. We thought racism was dead.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of us kind of just moved on like, no, that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, it does.
But you guys went right to the heart of it. Share the journey. How did this start?
Starting.
And then just kind of follow through. Tell this audience and why this is so important.
So Tim and I obviously had conversations about different shootings that happened where a black man would be shot by a police officer in the community would rise up and would talk about and try to figure out what's going on with that. And he and I would talk about it. And when I started watching all of this happen, and this was about 4 years ago, I guess now, there were several shootings and in response to police, and then there was in Dallas, the shooting of police officers downtown. And it was in that season right there, I sat down with my staff and I said, racism is not a vote we can take in Congress. And we typically sit as a staff and talk about policy issues. This is a cultural issue. This is who we are as Americans, that we have not finished with the task. There's not a vote we can take, and there's not a bill that we can pass that's going to solve this. I don't know what we're going to do, but we're going to work on this. And we started committing to be able to pray about this. After about 2 weeks of just kind of praying and talking about it, I started just walking around and talking to people in my state whenever I'd travel and just say to people, has your family ever had a family of another race in your home for dinner? It was just a very simple question. And I'd ask people of all races, all backgrounds, has your family ever had a family of another race in your home for dinner? Almost everybody that I asked that question of answered back to me, I have friends of another race. To which I would say, that wasn't what I asked you. Has your family ever had a family of another race in your home for dinner? And when they got past the no, it hasn't happened, I would just say, why not? And it just started this dialogue. And some of it for them was internal, some of it was external, back and forth. And I wouldn't push, I would just ask the question. Tim and I started talking about it and just kicking this idea around, and we formed an idea that was very simple, just called Solution Sundays. To say, if we're going to initiate the issue about race, race is not going to be something we're going to vote on. It's a family issue, it's a heart issue. And this is something that we should lead as a church. Of all groups that should lead on this, it should be us. I mean, you can go all the way back to the book of Jonah. The book of Jonah is really about racism. You get to chapter 4 and Jonah's griping in front of God. I knew you would forgive those people, and I hate them, and I didn't want to come because I knew you would forgive them. And God puts the vine around him and says, you love this vine more than you love those people. That's not me. And though you have said those people to them, I don't. So from the earliest days, we as a church should be a people that are passionate about people of all races, of all backgrounds. And I think it's an area that we should lead. And to me, it's not one church inviting another church that's another race that meets on Sundays together. It's one family engaging with another family and actual friendship and relationship.
Something happens when we break bread together.
Absolutely.
Something happens when we have coffee together, and you actually get to know somebody. And I've got to believe, from your background in the ministry, being called into being a youth pastor, I still believe one of the most segregated times there is in America is Sunday morning church. And did that play a part of it, of that I want to be a part of the solution of bringing that America together?
That absolutely played a part of it. And the camp that I directed was multiracial, was inner city, suburban, open country. Everybody came. But when everybody came, there was still a challenge of everybody meeting each other. It would still be this group over there and this group over there. Though there's 5,000 of us all at once, we're not connecting. And to me, the biggest single issue is family to family. When, as parents, my kids see me sitting at the dinner table with someone of another race, and they see this as normal conversation, that this is typical. Why wouldn't this be a normal conversation? Kids don't believe things until they see it. And when they see us actually having that dialogue, it's very different than us saying, let's talk about it.
I'd rather see a sermon than hear a sermon. So Senator Scott, be ice cream for a second and just fill in the cracks. Give us your part of this journey, this part of the story, and really the impact it has on you as an African-American United States Senator and Republican conservative.
Certainly. First, to have James mull over the importance of addressing racism is unfortunately oftentimes an unusual prospect for a white guy who has no reason to focus on this issue to take on the challenge and then come to me. I didn't go to him with the opportunity to create Solution Sundays. He came to me. So I think it's important to remember that our nation continues to evolve in the right direction. And so often in the public forum, the one thing that we miss is that America has made incredible progress in a very short period of time. Necessary progress without any question, but we've made a lot of progress. For me, the story really starts back in Charleston. 4 years ago, we had a major church shooting where a white racist walked into Mother Emanuel Church. My uncle attended that church for 50 years, so I'm very familiar with the pastor at the time, Clemente Pinckney, was a good friend of mine. Walked in there, sat through a Bible study for over an hour, and then executed 9 people because they were black. To get that phone call that Wednesday night, and then to text the pastor, Clemente, ask him if he was okay and is everybody okay? To not get a response and then to find out what happened, and to have witnessed all around this country the racial riots and challenges and marches that have happened after other shootings, to watch my city and my state, instead of pulling apart, we actually came together. Instead of looking with suspicion at someone who didn't look like you, for some reason we started holding hands and spending more time together. It was the most remarkable thing from a racial reconciliation perspective I had ever witnessed in my life. And what sparked that response was the 9 family members remembering the truth of Matthew 5:44, to love those who persecute you, to pray for your enemies. To have that response 36 hours after your family members were executed, to have the response of love, of forgiveness, looking the killer in the eyes and simply saying that through the love of Jesus Christ, your life can be different. Our city, overwhelmed with the light of love, followed their lead. And so when James approached me about working on something like Solution Sunday, it was as if God had said, well done, Charleston. Join forces and let's see if we can get that fire around the nation. Because frankly, in the darkest of the hour, a flicker of light dissipates all the darkness.
Amen.
And when we saw that in Charleston, and then the state reacted to it, and then the nation responded to it, and then the international community stopped and said, what in the world is happening in the place where the Civil War started? The reaction was not to find your corners and to become more tribal. The reaction was the exact opposite, which is the reaction of love. And if we remember 1 John 4:14, that it is in essence about love. It works. And so I was really thankful that James embraced the concept of addressing racial challenges in a way that was with affection.
What a testimony of the power of the gospel.
Right.
And how God can work even a situation like that for good.
Right.
Absolutely.
Because you look at it and you go, how in the world does any good come out of that?
Yeah.
And to hear that, that is truly an inspiration. I remember when Mutual of Omaha came and they interviewed Donna and I. And afterwards, one of the young girls, probably about 24 years old, just out of college, she said, I'm so glad I sat through that interview. Because I don't know if I've been taught this way, but I feel like I've been taught this way, that if I don't agree with you, if I don't look like you, I'm supposed to hate you. And we've got to get over that.
Oh, yeah.
We have got to get over that. So, James, you come up with this idea, Solutions Sunday. Give us the backdrop to that. How did you go about with Senator Scott and some of the dynamics that come to play? And how could it be a model for maybe some of us
Yep.
to
So
utilize
it is
this?
way simpler than it looks. It's not a program. There's no budget to it. There's no massive experience. There's no anything else. It's a very simple concept.
To
It's
all the
personal.
pastors, that was
I know.
music to their ears.
Well,
No budget.
here's the funny part. I sit down with so many pastors, and I'll share this idea. And the reason we called it Solution Sundays was just for Sundays, for most people, it's a little slower afternoon. Pastors, a notable exception to that it's not slower. But for a lot of people, it's a slower day. And to say, this is a day that invite someone over for lunch or for dinner that day. And just to be able to take some time, that it's a little bit slower day for them. And to say, invite them over. This is not one church finding a church of a different ethnicity and saying we're going to get together in the fellowship hall and have potluck. Do not do that. That's not the goal of it. The power of it is the individual trying to figure out, who am I going to invite? Because most people that I talk to would say, I don't know who I would invite to do that. And I would say, that's our first problem. You say you know people or have friends that are of another race, but you don't know anyone well enough that you'd invite them to your home for dinner. There's a gap in relationships there. The second thing I heard from a lot of people was, what would we talk about? To which I would smile at people and say, we're from Oklahoma. Talk about football and the weather. Okay? What else are we going to talk about? Just normal. How are your kids? What's going on? Just get to. There's no list of questions to say go through these questions programmatically. The goal was to penetrate the threshold of our homes with relationship, and to be able to go through it. And most people that we talk to say it's way too simplistic. I was like, really? Have you done it? Because it looks harder than you think.
And there's no agenda
Nope.
other than getting to know them and
Right.
them getting to know you.
Sitting around the table, breaking bread, getting a chance to get to know each other, knowing that in the essence we are still called to a 2 Corinthians 5, being reconcilers. There's a lot more broken relationship among race than most of us want to admit. And this breaks through to get to a dialogue around the table and just see where it goes. It may go into a deep conversation. It may be shallow the whole time. Find out and just go engage.
So Senator Scott, I'm assuming you took his lead and you've invited some people, you didn't call me, but you've invited some people of a different ethnicity over to your home, and you had, how'd it go?
Well, I have tried to call you, but you gave me the wrong number, so I'm not exactly sure what that suggests. I don't know, but
I think
I was about to say, you don't know Tim's Thanksgivings. That's all, this is not new around this place. Yeah.
Yes. So for me, I have the good fortune of having grown up in a very integrated household. So the guy who led me to the Lord is a white guy. who we worked at a movie theater together back in the early 1980s, and I would always ask him, why are you so happy? You're living in a trailer park. I'm living in jacked up poverty. That's a philosophical word, jacked up. There's some stunned faces out there.
You got a great resume to be a U.S. Senator.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Exactly. Well, this is what America looks like for me. So we literally, he kept saying, because Jesus Christ is the Lord of my life. And over time, when I entered into college, I figured out why you could always be joy-filled no matter your circumstances. And he and I started having dinners and playing tennis, and we just became best friends. So probably 14, 15 years ago, we started having his family and my family come together for Thanksgiving. And then we started doing Christmases together. And then we added 4th of July's together. And then we added weekends hanging out together. So literally, that relationship has now we've brought in some friends. My sister-in-law is Korean, so when she comes in, we have some kimchi and some bulgogi and some kalbi, and then my brother's married to someone of a different race, so we get this whole international flavor. My nephew, who is the son of the Korean girl, and my brother, I call him Blasian. He's black and Asian. That's only offensive if you're not Blasian. So anyways, so literally when he brings his friends together, he's got his best friend's Chinese, another guy from Africa, and his white friends. They all come together and they never talk about race.
It's breaking down walls.
They just talk about life. For the 25-year-old, consistently, it is the most natural thing to have a conversation about the things that we have in common. When you get a little older, it's more natural to be afraid of the things that you don't have in common, which is where the wall is. I've found very quickly, if you go back in the Bible, Moses and his African wife might be a place to start the conversation. So literally, from Genesis on, we find that the gospel is pretty clear on those of us who call ourselves within the framework of Christians. That's our family. It's not, I'm first a Christian, not black.
Amen.
I'm a part of according to Galatians 3:29, we're all adopted into this family. So if we start with that as our lens, it's really easy to invite your family over. Now, I want them to go home still.
Yeah.
I'm not saying to move in.
Time to come, time to go.
Exactly. It's Ecclesiastes 3, right? I mean,
Time for all things.
you don't have to go home, but you got to get out of here at some point, right? So, it's
Well,
important.
if you would invite me over, I'd bring Dutch letters. That
Excellent. All right, good. I'm not sure what that is, but it might be good.
I don't know.
Okay, good.
Any idea?
You know, there's the seed. Invite me over. Senator Lankford, what did you learn about Senator Scott, or what did you learn about the African-American family that you had come dine in your home? Because I'm thinking this was new for you to. It was not new.
It wasn't new for me either. I can walk backwards. My roommate in college was African American, and it was for my family. I grew up in the Dallas area, and so there's a lot of racial integration and isolation, both in Dallas. When I went to college, my freshman year, I had one roommate, and I had to get a different roommate my second semester, or my second year. And there's a guy that I met at church, his name was George, and we were friends, and we hung out all the time, and he needed a roommate, and I needed a roommate. It was a great match, and so we ended up rooming together. And so we roomed together all that semester, and wasn't anything about it. I can still remember that when my grandmother came to visit one time in one weekend, and when she came to visit and she was down the weekend, she said, "Oh, I haven't got a chance to meet your roommate yet. We were at church on Sunday night." And I said, "I got a chance to meet your roommate." And I said, "Oh, he's right down there at the end of the pew. I'll introduce you." And she said, "Is it the guy talking to the black guy?" I said, "No, it is the black guy." And I honestly hadn't thought anything about it. But for her, it was like, "You're rooming with a black guy?" And it was a huge issue all of a sudden. And I was like, "Yeah, actually his name is George." And so, but that whole dialogue for us, George was in our friendship, was the first person that I could really have hard race conversations with, if I can make sense. To be able to pull somebody aside and say, "Okay, I don't understand this. I hear this joke, I don't understand this joke," okay? Or to be able to talk to someone, he was the first person I can remember sitting down with and say, "I don't understand Miss Black USA. Help me get context to that," because in my world, I didn't get that. And we would sit and visit, and I would go, totally get that. But he was the first safe person for me to be in a relationship with. But it dramatically shifted all of my relationships and all of my conversations. So it wasn't new for me in that sense, but I'm finding it is radically new to a lot of people. And so for me, it was finding opportunities for people to be able to be in dialogue and to see people as a person created in the image of God, not as a person that has a different skin color or a different family background or eats different foods or likes different music or hangs out in different places. Well, what does that matter?
I agree with Senator Scott. We've come so far in this country, but what do you see today that's fueling division? Where race is now, I mean, racism is a more high-profile issue today than it has been for a long time.
Yeah.
It's, in me, yes, the shootings, yes, what you've referenced, but there's more to it as well. What do you see being the underlying factor that's bringing racism to a higher?
Well, I think in many ways it still is an unsolved mystery and issue that we haven't fully embraced and dealt with. The other part of it is that there are people who have figured out how to monetize conflict. And the profit driven by tribalism is enormous, and the political benefits of identity politics is a narrative that you can't get enough of. And the media, I think, makes more money off of conflict than they do kumbaya. I could be wrong. Last time I checked, they're making more money now when in fact 93% of Americans say that we are too corrosive and too toxic as a nation and too polarized. The 7% who disagree are making a lot of money off of it. So if you really think about the primary driver of this new division, I think it's people have figured out how to monetize conflict.
So if it's monetizing it, if it's tribalism, if it's this is what sells, I mean, this is what makes people watch, how do we break through that? I mean, how do we break, because obviously we look at a country, we can't go on as divided as we are, where I talked about earlier, you can't just represent one part of America.
Right.
You have to lead all of America.
Right.
How do we break through that?
So let me make a couple comments on it. One is, the United States is one of the few countries in the world that's actually even trying to break through this. Most parts of the world, they still isolate by race or by tribe. Most of the world still. If I go to Guatemala right now, people would say everybody in Guatemala gets along. Oh no, that's not true. In the northwest side of Guatemala, they're Mayan descent, and they have a totally different perspective, and they're isolated. So you go country to country all around the world, and most areas do not do race the way we do. And you want a simple way to be able to prove it? Watch the opening ceremony of the Olympics. When the flags march in and the teams march in, look at the diversity on that team. And then look at the diversity of the United States team and see the difference of what we are trying to do as a country that most other countries aren't even attempting to do. So let's begin with, we have come a long way, but we are not close to being done. We've made incredible progress, but we've got to be able to finish what we have started on it. So for me, the work that's still to be done is still the heart issue. It's not the legislative issue as much as it is the heart issue. It's the family to family. It's the relationship to relationship. It's continuing to be able to break down those barriers. That should be led by the church. That should be led by people that say, I see you in the image of God.
That's what I want to get to, because as you say, you know, we're not close to having this resolved yet. You said it's unresolved. There's a lot of pastors and church leaders here today. What's the message to the church on how do we resolve this? How do we resolve it? And will it be resolved on this side of eternity?
Yeah. Well, division will never be solved. Whether that division is based on race or culture or tribes or those who believe and who don't believe. I'd say a few things if you give me a little time. We only have a few minutes left, but I'll take all 6 of those minutes.
You go ahead.
Just joking. He's got a lot to say. The first thing I would say is, let's be careful not to buy into the narrative that we are as divided as being sold to us. Amen. We're really not as divided as being sold. Once again, if you look at anyone who's not paying close attention to cable news, they're probably happier and getting along better because they haven't bought into the narrative that is really a profit-driven narrative. So first thing I'd say is we're not nearly as divided as it's being sold. Number two, division starts in our own hearts. So to pastors and to believers, the first thing we should do is check our own heart. If we're going to live up to Matthew 22, verse 37, loving your neighbor as yourself, check your closet, and that's a good place to start. And the third thing I would say is that the division we should be most concerned with, beyond the racial concepts and the stuff that we're talking about now, is that the new minority in this nation that will be attacked in the most aggressive way are those who believe in a biblical worldview.
Right.
So just know that resolving the issue in our own hearts provides more favor from the Lord, from my perspective, to work on what is going to be the next major battle of division in this country. And it is, can we as Christians live out the gospel of Jesus Christ without being attacked as bigots and just list them? That is the current fight on college campuses.
Right.
And what you see there is coming to your government, save the favor of God on this country.
So you're saying this audience is not immune from the persecution?
Oh, no.
It's coming.
So the blessed are those who are persecuted, for my sake. We're starting to see that.
And
We know.
Yeah, let me just say this quick thing as well. I don't believe Washington changes the country. I think the country changes Washington. And so there's this belief that you go elect godly people like Tim Scott, and Tim's going to go fix this. That's not how it works in America. Tim gets elected in South Carolina because there are some amazing folks in South Carolina that have the same heart that he does that sends him on there. So the nation changes Washington, not Washington changes the nation. And there should be no prime mover stronger than the church for engaging the gospel throughout a community to show love and affection, and for pastors to even talk about it. I'm amazed the number of pastors I talk to that they've never preached on racial reconciliation, that's never been a sermon or a conversation from the pulpit. Because for some, it's like, you know what, it's really not an issue in our community. Really go ask. Let's go find out. Go poke that and find out what happens. But it's clear throughout Scripture of that engagement. So make it clear from our pulpits as well.
So with a couple minutes left, what do you want this audience to leave with? I mean, you guys are a great inspiration. It's a great example. We applaud you as U.S. senators and the work that you do, and love your godly hearts. What would you want this audience to do to leave, to take away from this message?
You want to start or you want me to start?
Go ahead.
The simple thing that I'd want you to leave with is, number one, has your family ever invited a family of another race to your home for dinner? Whether it's your grandkids coming over, whether it's your kids, whoever it may be, in your home, not at a restaurant, you're copping out, in your home for dinner, just to be able to have dialogue. If that's not happened, you should do that. And you should even have dialogue over how many different races and backgrounds could that happen, to be able to be in your home and to be able to have that dialogue. Then I would say take it to the next level in conversation with people, and just to be able to initiate that as a pastor, be able to look at the Scripture and to be able to bring this up as a heart issue. It is a heart gospel issue about God redeeming each part of our life, and this is a part of our life. And some people would say, that's not really an issue, I just never associate with them. Well, guess what? It is an issue then. And so we've got to be able to work through that. So getting a chance to be able to preach about that, teach about that, but I think it still starts in our own homes and our own families, and then pushing that out to others and encouraging them to do the same.
The whole love your neighbor as yourself.
It's a crazy concept. You know what? People in D.C. say that never works, but I think the principles of Scripture work no matter where you live.
Without question.
Yeah.
Senator Scott.
It's hard to add to what James just said. I guess
Can
the
I
only
quote you on that? Can I quote you on that? That's a good quote.
Well, I'm getting ready to say something that will actually make you to wonder whether or not I meant what I just said, though. So, but I will anyways. If you're having a hard time finding someone to invite to dinner, I'm here. I'm available. I need to eat 365 days a year, and I'm counting the room. There's a whole lot of opportunities for me to come to your house and break some bread. I like salmon, medium well. It's a filet as well, medium well. So this is good.
One of the greatest divisions in America is vinegar-based barbecue or tomato-based barbecue.
Yeah, so
That's one of the great
tomato-based barbecue is
tomato-based
simple.
is correct. Right. That's the way to go.
Praise the Lord. We solved all the problems. I will say in my last few seconds, to be honest with you, I think if we would just embrace a biblical worldview without our human biases and just challenge ourselves, not to do what he just said, but challenge ourselves to fully embrace the gospel of Jesus Christ and live it out consistently in every single area of our lives, and we will attract people saying, why are you different? And that will be, well done, my good and faithful servant, Matthew 25:21.
Yeah. Can I make one quick comment on that as well?
Sure.
And Tim and I talked about this as well. 1 Timothy chapter 2, go look at it again. It's the passage you know well about being aliens and strangers in this world. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. We all know that one. I love asking people, what's the next verse? The next verse is honor authority. And it's a striking call to the church that I think Peter was writing to them. If you look at Peter and you break down what Peter was trying to do, he was writing to them saying, you are in a culture that doesn't understand the gospel at all. So here's what I would encourage you to do. Live as an alien and stranger in this world. And then he gave multiple illustrations of how to do it. The first of his illustrations were honor authority. Why? Because no one does that. And when you do that, you'll stand out and you'll have an opportunity to present the gospel. If the church sounds like Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, if that's what our dialogue is, we don't sound any different than anyone else. I tell people all the time, if you complain about government and complain about what's going on, that is our mission field. I would appreciate if you pray for those people as much as you complain, because that engages us to be able to live the 1 Peter calling to say, live such a good life that it stands out and you do look different on that. And when you were talking about that before, we've talked about that before, but I think it's really critical for this group that you have a biblical foundation to also not go into the siren song of the noise of our national media and national politics and think that's the way you have to do it. That's not what he called us to be.
Wow, wow, wow. That is principles over politics. That is Psalm 121. Where does my help come from? It comes from Washington, D.C. No, it does not.
It is a Capitol Hill.
It comes from the Lord.
Amen.
So the encouragement, look higher, think bigger. Let the church be the church. We are so, so grateful that you two would take the time and spend time with us. Please give them. Unbelievable. Good job. Great job.
Well, thank you.
James,
Really
thank
good
you.
being with you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Look at this.